I've got this HW90K and the trigger is so feather light you can't feel it at all, and it's dangerous, I think. So we're going to have a look and see if we can do something with it. I couldn't find anything on the internet, so I thought I'd show you what I do. First of all, we pull this pin out, then the trigger does come out. You can only move it so far backwards because there's a latch, so you have to hold the latch down, and then you can withdraw the whole unit. Now I'm going to strip down the trigger unit. It cocks like that, and it's got a hair light release. There seem to be two adjustments, the big adjusting screw there and a little one up inside the trigger, but we don't know what they all do yet. So we're going to have a look. Now to keep all the components together and make a little note of anything unusual or anything I need to know. Now I've just knocked out the pin that holds the end of the mainspring, which is there, and when a spring's involved it's always handy to know which way it was in, so we can draw a picture of it, just so that we know which way to put it in when we put it back. And that pin goes with the spring. Now, because this is on film, I don't actually have to write down which hole that pin was in. There are two holes. We don't know what the second hole's for. It's probably something to do with manufacturing. You know, an assembly procedure during manufacturing, probably. Right. I'm going to clean all these parts off and have a quick look at them and see if we can see anything amiss. Straight away we see a broken pin just down there, which was in that hole there. So that could be the problem. Now I've assembled the trigger unit on a piece of wood just so that you can all see what's going on. Now, when you cock the gun normally, the cocking arm presses on there where my finger is, which cocks the trigger mechanism, which stops that latch there from coming down, which in turn catches the piston just there. When you pull the trigger, that's what happens. Now, I am a bit disappointed with the whole layout, really. There's a ridiculously teeny spring just inside there, which goes front to back. Very easy to lose, and on this gun it was actually misplaced and floating about in the bottom of the unit. The 2mm diameter rod that goes through there takes the pressure from the trigger adjusting screw. Now, when you screw the adjusting screw in, it screws that little piece there. It forces that up, which puts a little bit more pressure on that spring there, and it seems to adjust anyway, the amount of engagement between the sears, which are just in there. This screw on the trigger, from there to there, the grub screw, does absolutely nothing. The first part of the trigger, what you would normally feel as a slight tension of spring-loaded free play before the trigger begins to bite. there is absolutely nothing, and the trigger can just wobble backwards and forwards. That screw is either just a bit of deliberate kidology, or it's a stock trigger that's been used from a different gun for this. Very disappointing. What it really wants is a leaf spring pressing down on there just to hold the trigger forward, just to take the first amount of play up. Anyway, I'm going to replace that pin there, put the whole thing back together and see how we go. Now this is the two-part component with the teeny weeny springing that I was talking about. As you can see, it's just in there. Now, when you're assembling these things, which one bit fits inside the other and it all moves about, if you just put a temporary dowel in, which holds the thing together, and that temporary dowel gets pushed out of the way by the real dowel, which is that one. And it holds everything together while you're assembling it. There we are. Simple, without any bits flying about the kitchen in this case. As I was saying, when you're reassembling guns, the pins go in from left to right, from port to starboard, as it were. Now I've replaced the broken dowel. I've made it slightly bigger. It was 2mm. I've used a piece of a 2.5mm drill bit. Not that one, that one. Piece of a 2.5mm drill bit, just to make it a little bit stronger, and I hope it doesn't happen again. Now this time, for a temporary dowel, I've just used a piece of matchstick. So we'll pop that in. Well, here we are. This is the unit reassembled. It's cocked now, and it must be cocked before it's put back in the gun, or you can't get the trigger guard back on. Now, this adjusting screw, it's at the beginning of its adjustment when there are about 5 threads showing, and it's at the end of the adjustment when it suddenly starts to feel tight. And I suspect people think that's when it's beginning to adjust and give it that extra whine that breaks that pin. Doesn't even seem to be doing a lot, but we'll put it back on the gun and see what happens. Well, it's back together, and to be honest, I can feel very little difference between fully adjusted one way or fully adjusted the other. I have checked the parts list. There are no parts missing. I think it's just not a trigger that I like. There's absolutely no feel when you get to the biting point, it just goes. Germans have some funny ideas about triggers altogether, but there we are, they lost the war, didn't they? Right, just one thing to note, you can't put the trigger guard back on unless the trigger is cocked. And even then, you can only do it with the safety button pressed in. There we are. Now we've done it.